And there we go. And welcome to the Art Bubble Festival, Bryan. It's lovely to have you with us from England on an interview here.
Nice to be there virtually.
Yeah, yeah, because you don't travel a lot, do you, in general?
Yeah, we've sort of stopped flying. We've tried to stop flying. The environment. We ended up going to Naples for the comic convention in Sicily early this year.
Okay.
But that was only because we were supposed to be doing it a year or two ago. Then COVID happened, and they lost a lot of money the festival because it paid for all the flights, and they couldn't get back. And and we thought we were better go to for their sake, really.
Yeah.
But no, we go to been to London a few times this year. We get to Paris when we can. Been to Paris once this year.
Yeah, but it's nice being able to take the train. I do enjoy that as well. And well, I asked you to join us for Art Bubble digitally, partly due to the fact that it might not be as easy to take a train from England to Denmark. While it is possible, it will take I suppose it will take a few days. But I've known you for some 20 odd years, I think.
Something like that, yeah.
And the last time I interviewed you was a massive, big interview regarding Heart of Empire, the second installment in your now 3-part Luther Arkwright series. And you've just finished book number 3, and it's out in England, I've been told.
Yes, it came out in July. We had the launch party. Here's a copy.
Oh, it looks gorgeous. Yeah.
Yes,
and it's due out. Yeah, and it's due out in the US from Dark Horse early next year. Yeah. I think I'll pick up the English copy when I'm over there in about a month from now.
Right, because you're going to the Lakes Festival, aren't you?
I'm going to the Lakes Festival, yes, with Art Bubble. Yeah. So I'll be bringing with me a wonderful Danish artist, Björk Mathias Friis, who's just been published in America as well. And we have some copies coming in of the book coming into to Lykaf. So we're looking forward to that.
Good.
But as I was saying, I interviewed you about Heart of Empire, and I haven't had the pleasure of reading the new Luther Arkwright. So I'd like to start by asking, what was it that made you want to go into Luther Arkwright for a third time?
Yeah, well, it's since finishing Heart of Empire, which is about 22 years ago now, I've had ideas for another story, but it's the same thing really what propelled me to do the first one, which was the rise of the right wing in Britain in the in the late 70s and early 80s, with the Thatcher government coming in and the National Front, this fascist organisation marching on the streets. It was frightening. I mean, me and Alan Moore were both convinced it was the start of the 1,000-year Reich, the Conservative government. And V for Vendetta is also grew out of that same sort of background a year or two after Arkwright. But, well, the same thing's happening now, basically. So the new book, although I first and foremost, it's entertaining, I hope, enjoyable adult science fiction story, first and foremost. But, it does have an anti-nationalistic, anti-right-wing bias. to it.
Mm. Yeah, because that's absolutely true. I mean, the rise around the world in
Yeah.
nationalism and everything else that's going on um, could really make for yes, some compelling fiction and comments on modern society. That's for sure. So, how was your approach to Luther Arkwright this time around? I've seen a few pages online, but nothing much. Um, the first book, of course, was black and white, and the second one was wonderfully coloured by Angus McKee, if I remember correctly. So, how did you approach this third book?
This one I wanted to return to the original feel of Outright. This sort of slightly experimental. It's not quite as experimental as the first one, but there is an experimental side to it. But it's in black and white again. And it's I went back to the old cross-hatching style. It didn't take me very long to realize why I'd stopped doing it, because it's so time consuming. It's ridiculously time consuming. And I know the book's 230 pages long, but it still took me most of 2 years
Mm,
to draw. And that was while the lockdown was happening. So I wasn't going anywhere else,
yeah,
for a year or so. Still, it takes forever. Cross hatching, it's a bit like knitting. You can spend an hour, you've covered an area about this big. It's just got to overlay and overlay and
mm,
line, build up texture and build up depth.
mm,
It's very time consuming job.
I can imagine. So you've been drawing on paper, I suppose. You haven't gone digital.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
no.
Mm,
I go and I clean the artwork up on computer. I do the lettering on computer.
mm,
Tweak the artwork on computer.
yeah,
That art's in the wrong place. It needs moving a little bit over there. It's quite easy to do that on computer.
that's true. Did you used to, on the original pages, did you then, if you had to correct something, would you cut them out and move them, or move entire panels?
White gouache, process white, you paint lines out.
Mm,
Although the original two were done on CS10 paper,
right.
which was the best line paper you could get. It's not made anymore. They've not made it for 20 odd years now. And it's ceramic coated. So it
Right.
meant that the ink didn't spread at all. Just it stayed exactly where you laid it. It didn't spread in the cracks in the paper.
Right.
And you can actually, with a scalpel, you could actually scrape off a layer or two, then ink over the top again. As well as
Oh,
getting,
wow.
you could get some great effects with the scalpel
Mm,
on the ink, like little light shines, things like that. Yeah, and with this one, I wanted to be a bit gritty. I think I chose the wrong paper this time. I chose this sort of quite cheap cartridge paper because I give it a bit of a rough feel, and then I had to spend ages then cleaning up all the the little spreads and things like that in the paper.
mm,
So that was a bad choice, I think.
yeah.
No, this paper was discontinued before I started Art of Empire. I discovered this, and I went to the local art shop at the time and I bought every pad, A3 pad of CS10 they had, which was about 20. So I had a stock of it for a while, but I don't
Mm,
have any left.
yeah. I suspect maybe that you don't have any left because you've also, since you did Heart of Empire, done 5 volumes of a series named Grandville.
Mm.
Is that one of the reasons?
Yeah, I've done about 12 graphic novels since then, at least.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, because you also have the books that you've done with your wife, Mary. Is it 2 or 3, or is it more by now?
it's 4.
It's
I'm
4
actually
now.
currently drawing. I've nearly finished it. Really, I've only got about 20 pages to go. Mary's
Mm.
5th book,
Oh, right, wonderful.
which is it's called Armed with Madness, which is a fantastic title. I think she came up with. But
Mm.
it's a biography of Leonora Carrington, the surrealist artist, and
Okay.
it's a quote from her.
Yeah.
She's the only surrealist who spent time in a mental institution. But it's a fascinating story. And she was the last of the original surrealists. She only died about 2014, something like that.
Yeah.
And, she was there in the 20s in the Parisian scene with Picasso and Dali, and well, she was Max Ernst's lover for a while. She knew all these people, Man Ray and them. So she outlived them all. She was 96 or something when she died.
Oh, wow. That sounds amazing. I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah.
But I want to return briefly to Granville, which is, I do feel that there is some sort of parallel with Luther Arkwright from Heart of Empire and the original Luther Arkwright in Granville. But for those who haven't read it, how would you describe the book?
Well, there's 5 standalone stories, although there is a bit of a story arc over them. Any one of them can be read on its own. The anthropomorphic steampunk detective thrillers, basically. So the bits, they're a romp, enjoyable, thriller, really, with lots of deduction in it. The central character, Detective Inspector LeBrock of Scotland Yard, he's a sort of working class badger with he has the deductive abilities of Sherlock Holmes, but being a badger is a bit of a bruiser as well. So he's two-fisted badger, two-fisted detective.
Yeah, and why did you choose the anthropomorphic path in terms of these stories?
Because that's where the idea came from. It's I'd finished doing Alice in Sunderland, which took me 3 years, a long book to draw. A lot of Alice in Sunderland is about Lewis Carroll, a lot of it, and his connection with the northeast of England. And his illustrator, of course, the Alice stories, was John Tenniel, in the original stories. And a big influence on Tenniel was a early 19th century French illustrator called Jean-Ignace Isidore Girard, who did a lot of mostly anthropomorphic cartoons and illustrations, very fine illustrations, actually. And they were criticized, the sort of silly behavior of the middle class and, fashion and things like this, the satirical prints. And he did all these under the pen name, J.J. Granville. And I've had a book of his work since the 70s, trade paperback of his work. And after I finished Alice, I was clearing away a lot of the reference books I was using. And I picked it up, I ended up leafing through it again. And it's just suddenly occurred to me, Granville, that could be, that's interesting, it's got this flash of inspiration. It could be a nickname for Paris in an alternative reality where Paris is the biggest city in the world and it has a world-spanning empire and this populated by animals. So that's where the idea, that's why it's called Granville. It's where the whole idea came from.
Yeah, and but the whole universe of Granville isn't just populated by animals and anthropomorphic animals, but also by people who are viewed as a lower species.
Yes, the humans are these sort of underclass. They don't have any citizenship rights, and it's just a reversal of the situation. And it's a way to address racism in the story. They're having civil rights marches. There's a right-wing party again who's rising to try and eradicate the door faces, as the French call them. They all had a bit of interest to the story.
Yeah, and your stories, I mean, even from way back, I remember reading Brainstorm way back when I started reading, and it was old by that time when I got into Luther Arkwright. and you've always been very political in your work. And as you mentioned earlier, you're doing book number 5 now with Mary, and I know you've done one called Rain, which
Yeah.
is I haven't had the pleasure of reading it. I'm sorry to say, but it's as far as I know, it's a commentary on our current environmental situation.
Yes, yes, it's about climate change and the
Mm,
need to protest, and yeah, so it's political as far as that goes. But I think climate change goes beyond politics. Actually,
mm,
it's far too important. Yeah, well, if you might have noticed that the third book we did was a biography of Louise Michel, the sort of French anarchist who was fought on the barricades of the Paris Commune, and that's all fascinating bit of French history. That it's not many people know her story.
mm,
Even in France, a lot of people know her name because there's sort of 158 schools named after her in France. There's a metro stop in Paris named after her. There's a square in Paris named after her. But not many French people even know who she is. So, we wanted to tell a story. I came across her in a book, and I said to Mary, read about this. She's fantastic. She was crazy. I mean, she was an amazing person. She was completely without fear.
mm,
She was a poet, a writer. She's a friend of Victor Hugo. As I said, she fought on the barricades. She got sent to a penal colony where she helped the natives rise up against the French colonial
mm.
oppressors. Yeah, she's just an amazing woman. But I mean, the Granville books, I'd say they're just one huge love letter to the detective and crime genre.
Mm.
And they reference lots of different things. His sidekick, LeBrock's sidekick, is Roderick Ratsey, who in some part is based on Ratty from Wind in the Willows, but also P.G. Woodhouse's Bertie Wooster,
Oh,
and
really?
also Dorothy L. Sayers' Lord Peace of Whimsy, detective.
Mm,
And the first book, it's quite sort of Tarantino-esque. It's got a Tarantino sort of theme. The second one is very Hitchcock.
mm,
The third one's sort of basically a James Bond theme running through it. It addresses different sorts of detective stories. I do a missing persons story, locked room mystery, Agatha Christie type puzzle in the fifth one, in a flashback with this
mm,
gang war. I all these sort of standard crime tropes
mm.
I cover in the books.
Yeah. And I love the books bit. Actually, the computer that I'm on right now, in order to raise the screen, is actually standing on top of my copies of Granville and Alice in Sunderland. Um, and yeah, I absolutely love the books to bit, and I think one of them might even be signed by you from several years ago.
Right.
But the art style that you used in Granville is closer to what I remember from Heart of Empire. And the art style that I've seen of Rain is more reminiscent of what I remember The Tale of One Bad Rat being like. So do you enjoy the stylistic changes in your work?
Yeah, well, I mean, the style you do the story is part of the storytelling. It's you can't divorce it from the storytelling. It gives the atmosphere and the mood, and I always try and choose the style that best suits the story.
Mm.
And it's not quite like the Bad Rat one. It doesn't have the thick lines and everything, but it is a lot of watercolor painting in it.
Oh, right. Because what I was thinking was also just as well that I mean, if I were to open Alice in Sunderland, I would immediately recognize elements and figures and characters as being your style. but that might not necessarily be the case if I were to open Rain, because it is, in my opinion and what I've seen of it, quite different.
Yeah. But have you seen Daughter of a Father's Eyes?
I have not.
Yeah,
No.
it's the first graphic novel I did with Mary.
Mm,
It was published in 2012, and that's quite a different style. Again, it's the sort
mm,
of, quite simple, the dots for eyes, done in pencil, done in a soft pencil, most of it, with a
mm.
watercolor wash. Yeah.
So yeah, so you're working in different media as well, in terms of watercolors and in terms of coloring, and yeah, now you're doing the black and white again. Um,
But as I said, the style is part of the storytelling. I've written the next book I want to do after I finish Mary's book, which is a Granville prequel.
oh, really?
Yeah, it's set 23 years earlier, at the time of if you know the story, at the time of the end of the French occupation of Britain.
Okay.
And it's called The Casebook of Stamford Hawksmoor. And Stamford Hawksmoor, of course, it turns out, you read about it in the fifth Granville book, is Lebrock's mentor, is the guy
Mm.
who trained him up, and the story of how he trained him up is part of that story, told in flashback.
Oh, right.
So this is actually a Stamford Hawksmoor adventure at the time, and it's before the steampunk revolution, so it's not actually steampunk. It's
Oh,
more
really?
like late Victorian. So rather than doing it in the very polished, finished, computer-colored style of Granville, I'm going to be doing it in sepia washes.
Oh,
With
wow.
perhaps I might even do it in pencil with a sepia wash. But yeah, it's going to look Victorian.
Oh, wow. That,
That's
yeah, I didn't actually expect you to return to the Granville. It always felt like, and I don't know if you said you would never return to it, but it always felt like, yeah, those 5 books were the stories that you
yeah.
wanted to tell in that universe.
Right. Well, this, as I said, this is an earlier story, and it
Mm,
actually, I think it's the best thing I've ever written, actually. And there's a lot of text in it, and it actually enriches the 5 that come. If you haven't read the Granville's books and you actually read this first, a lot of things what happen in the later stories, you'll go, oh yeah, that's because of this. You know what I mean?
yeah.
It will enrich the later stories.
Oh, that sounds wonderful.
And also that the Granville books, they didn't have any text. The only text was the spoken word,
Mm,
the speech balloons. They didn't have any narrative boxes.
mm.
This one has a lot of narrative boxes because it's all narrated by Stamford Hawksmoor, and he's telling the story.
Okay. So yeah, more in the way of, yeah, he's narrating it, and rather than us seeing the characters as things happen.
Yeah, well, you do,
Yeah.
but you have his voiceover, if you like,
Yeah.
a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Not when there's sort of exciting action going on, because and that needs to be read quickly.
Mm.
So, but yeah, a lot of his thoughts and musings are there in the things. It's written in the Victorian style as well.
Mm. I can't wait to see it. It's going to be a
Mm.
while, I imagine, but yeah, I'm
It's going to be a
excited.
while. I'm hoping to start working it in November, something like that.
Okay, yeah, yeah, because you've been, I mean, with 12 graphic novels in the last, 20 years, you've really been working hard.
Yeah, at least actually.
Yeah.
I haven't counted them, but
Yeah, and you have been working hard as well for, well, the first, I started reading comics in the 90s, and I don't know if I ever told you the story about how I started reading Luther Arkwright, which was
no.
basically my comic shop hired a new salesman for the comic section, and he would actually offer people, good customers, to say, like, okay, I have a suggestion for you that I'd like you to read. If you enjoy it, you buy it. If you don't, then you return it. I never
Good
returned a
sell.
book. Yeah, and one of them was Luther Arkwright. And then along came Brainstorm in the republished edition from sometime in the late
Oh, yeah.
90s, which was a lot of your early work.
The
And
collected stuff. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, and then now, as you mentioned before we started recording, it's a bit late to promote your biography, perhaps, as it were. But I don't know if you are printing more copies or not that people can check out, or if it will be available digital. But it's a 400+ page biography named Bryan Talbot, the father of British comics.
Well, the British graphic novel, I think it is. Yeah.
British graphic novels, I stand corrected. Now, and I've also heard others call you like the godfather of British comics. How, what do you feel about that moniker?
Yeah, I think it's because I was actually doing comics before a lot of my contemporaries. You know, I was doing comics for a few years, 2 or 3 years, 4 years perhaps, before sort of Alan Moore emerged, and you know, all the so-called Britpack. I think that's why. I don't know about this Godfather, who coined that. But yeah, no, the biography, I'm hoping, because the crowdfunding campaign finishes tomorrow, I'm hoping after it's published, I can then take that to book publishers and see if I can get a book publishing deal. Yeah, it's lavishly illustrated. It's practically every page has a 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 images on it.
Yeah.
Lots of text. No, I was approached by J.D. Herlock, who's a Lebanese academic who's a big fan of mine. He said, "Oh, I'd like to write your biography." I said, "Can I write your biography?" And I said, "Well, yeah, sure, I don't mind. Go ahead." So we started work on it, and then he was emailing me questions. What about this? What about that? And it became apparent very quickly that there's whole chunks of my life I didn't know anything about, personal details, you know, stuff that was not available through interviews or articles, anything like that. So after a week or two of sending him replies to things, I said, well, it'd be easier if I just write this bit myself, you know.
Yeah.
And I've ended up writing over half of it, I think. You know, so I wrote quite a chunk of it in the third person as well. So it's.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But yeah, I think it's. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in there that's never been appeared anywhere else, never been public before, and I think it'd be very interesting to people, not just fans of my work, but people, anybody interested in comics history, because I moved through the waters of comics history for 40 years.
Yeah, exactly.
I even started talking about it from the 50s before I was working in comics. So there's a lot of British comic history in there and a bit of American comic history. And also it'd be interesting to people who are artists themselves, comic artists who want to be comic artists, because there's a lot about the craft. It's all about the craft of writing in it, how I write the stories and how I structure them and how I put them together. And there's also a lot about how I draw them and materials used and things like this. So there's a lot of information other than stuff just about me, you know.
Yeah. Well,
so,
yeah. Well, I was sold on the book already. Now I'm more than sold on the book.
Right. Well, have you subscribed to the campaign?
Yeah, I've been getting. I think I've been seeing JD's updates through Facebook. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's where I caught wind of it first as well. But yeah, I definitely find it very interesting to see your work process and the work process of comics writing in general. I'm fortunate enough to actually own the script that you sent me all those years ago as well.
Right.
I still have that. Both
what was the script for?
That was Heart of Empire, either issue 2 or 3, that you sent me the original scripts to, with your handwritten notes, as well as the lettering script, also with notes on on them.
How much time do we have left? I see it's giving a countdown over here.
Yeah, it's giving me 8 minutes and 40
Oh, 8
seconds.
minutes. So that's not
Yeah,
too
so
bad.
we still have a few minutes to go.
Mm.
Now, you've also been involved in LICAF, which we began talking about, where you are the patron, and obviously I'm sitting here representing Art Bubble. Now, I've seen British comics festivals growing a lot these past few years. Same in Denmark. There are more and more festivals. There is more and more attention towards comics and graphic novels. Have you felt the change these past years, or how do you feel the comics industry, in your view, having gone through all those years, has moved?
Yeah, well, I go back 20 years here. There was one big comic convention a year. In the 90s, it was the UK Comic Art Convention, and then in 2000 or so, that got replaced by the Bristol Comic Expo. That was the big one, and now it seems there's something every weekend, happening. But I think LICAF, the Lakes International Comic Art Festival, is something very different, because there's been, in Britain, we've had comic conventions and comic marts since the 60s or something. But they're usually in a hotel or in one place, and very often commercial events, and they don't involve the general public. It's just comic fans. And for years, I wanted to see something like Luca or Angoulême happening in Britain, a proper European style comic festival. And we finally made it happen, in the Lake District. Because, this year it moves to Bowness, near the lake, actually next to the lake, Lake Windermere. But it's been in Kendal before, and both these places are small enough places we can take the town over for the weekend. So there's banners in the streets, there's events all around the town, some of them free, so we get lots of the people who live there coming in, free exhibitions. It's a charity, it's a charitable, it's non-profit making thing. And we have stuff that involves the local schools and the local college. And it's the only British festival that is like a proper European style festival. And I was, in 2011, I think it was, 2012. Yeah, I had an email from Julie Tate, who's a professional festival organizer. That's what she does for a living. She organizes book fest, stuff like this. And she's had this idea. She said, "Do you think," because she likes comics, she got into comics through her son. And she said, "Would it be a good idea doing a comics festival?" And she'd actually asked this question to Sean Phillips, who lives quite close to her. And apparently Sean said, "Oh, here's Bryan Talbot's email address, speak to him." Because he must have known I've had this dream about a European style festival for ages. So I sent her this long email describing exactly what the festival is like. And this was in October. And she's a dynamo, Within a month or two, she'd organized, literally 2 months, she'd organized a meeting in Kendal. And I put together a presentation, and she did a presentation, and we did this thing to all the town councillors, local business people, volunteers, just think about what we wanted it to be like. And they went for it. They said, "Yes, let's do it." And by the following October, the first one happened. So that's less than, it was less than a year to come together, really. And it was fully formed from the start. It was incredible. And we had foreign guests, lots of European guests. We had Jose Munoz, we had Trina Robbins from America. We had, I can't remember exactly, because they all blur into one, but we had a lot of American guests over the years.
Yeah, I've been fortunate enough to visit, yeah, twice now, and coming again for the third time
Mm,
this year. I'm very much looking forward to it. Um, Le Cafe is a wonderful festival. There's so much inspiration to be picked up exactly from Julie's work,
mm,
and the work that all of you have done for the festival. Um, so we're just about to run out of time because we're on a Zoom interview, and they do only afford us so much time. Um,
mm.
is there anything you'd like to finish off telling a potential new reader before we sign off for the evening?
I don't know. You should have asked me that beforehand so I could have thought of something. No idea. I mean, if you've not read my work before,
Mm,
try it. You may like it. I try to consider everything when I'm doing a graphic novel. I mean, I think the only way that you can be good at anything, no matter what it is to make yourself obsess about it. So every single one of my books, everything's been grist to the mill while I've been working on it.
mm,
It's all my energy and concentration goes on each book as I'm working on it.
mm. And those were some very lovely final words from Bryan Talbot. Thank you so much for joining us, Bryan. I look forward to seeing you at LICAF. And
Well, thanks for the invitation, and I look forward to seeing you there. Yes.
I'm very much looking forward to it.
I'm Charlie Adlard and you're watching Art Bubble TV.